you, Rodney, and welcome everyone to this inaugural online lifelong learning noontime knowledge. I'm all decked out here in my hiking, backpacking regalia. I'm all dressed up with no place to go. Um, I had actually planned to do a section of the Appalachian Trail in Maryland. Maryland's trail is only 40 miles long, and to start this weekend. Um, but the trail is also closed like nearly everything else. That may seem odd to you because surely one would be able to maintain social distance on the Appalachian Trail. And that's true for the trail itself, but at trail shelters and watering holes, um, the crowds can get large, and therefore the Appalachian Trail Conservancy decided to close the trail, and that was a wise decision. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for doing your part to keep yourself, your family, and the rest of the world as safe as we can be in these circumstances. Never before has it been driven home to us that indeed each and every one of us is our brothers and sisters' keeper. And I want to echo what Rodney said back at him. Working with him has been a real joy, and thanks to Rodney and Sue for Herculean efforts to try to get LLI up and running so that we could all stay connected. Now, it would be my preference to be outside right now, but we happen to live at a very busy intersection in Harrisonburg, and I would be competing with traffic noise if I tried to do that. So I'm in the sunroom of our house, and in just a moment, I am going to take off this beast, my pack. I'm going to grab the laptop. I'm going to sit down, and then we're going to try to do a quick transition to a slide presentation. So we've rehearsed that, and hopefully it will go smoothly, but I'm still learning like everybody else. So without further ado, so far so good. And now we are going to transition to a keynote slide presentation. Well, you've already seen the title slide, and our outline for today is fairly ambitious. I'd like to give you a little background to begin with, some background about the Appalachian Trail and some personal history that might be helpful. Then talk about trail conventions, trail amenities, trail stories, trail scenes, and if we have time, show you a little bit of my trail gear, but we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So let's start with some background, some history of the Appalachian Trail, the public-private partnership that maintains it, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and its role, and some personal history. Conceived in 1921 and completed in 1937, the Appalachian Trail, affectionately known as the AT, is the longest continuous footpath on Earth, traversing the spine of North America's Appalachian Mountains. From its origin on Springer Mountain, Georgia, to its terminus on Mount Katahdin in Maine, the AT winds nearly 2,200 miles, passing through 13 states as shown in red on this map. Now, two contiguous states, Virginia and West Virginia, have the most and the least miles, respectively. Virginia has 545 miles nearly. West Virginia, not quite 3. Now that's not counting 20 miles that they share along the ridge of Peters Mountain. The highest point on the AT is 6,643 feet above sea level at Clingman's Dome in the Great Smokies. The lowest point is only 124 feet above sea level at the crossing of the Hudson River in New York. Now, because the AT largely follows the spine of the Appalachians, there is a tremendous amount of up and down and a lot of rugged country. In Virginia alone, the Appalachian Trail passes through 5 or 6 wilderness areas. Hiking the AT is not a walk in the park. It can be extraordinarily grueling, and only 20% of those who attempt to hike the entire trail complete it. The Appalachian Trail was the brainchild of Benton McKay, a New England-bred forester and conservationist. He pitched his, quote, Appalachian Project nearly 100 years ago in an unusual venue, the Journal of the American Institute of Architects. The title of his 8-page paper was An Appalachian Trail, a Project in Regional Planning. Now, at the time, the US population was just over 100 million. The industrial cities of the East were largely unhealthy. Benton envisioned people flocking from Eastern population centers to the nearby Appalachians in search of physical and spiritual renewal in the context of nature. Benton's original proposal called not only for a trail, but also for considerable infrastructure, including shelter camps, community camps, even food and farm camps to logistically support those enjoying recreation at various trail sites. He believed that labor-saving devices would eventually afford workers more leisure time, and he advocated that time in nature was a great way to invest one's newfound leisure. Benton, however, never imagined that individuals would hike the trail in its entirety, only that they would take advantage of local opportunities and local access. It's instructive to hear McKay in his own words. It fortunately happens that we have throughout the most densely populated portions of the United States a fairly continuous belt of underdeveloped lands. These are contained in the several ranges that form the Appalachian chain of mountains. Several national forests have been purchased in this belt. These mountains, in several ways rivaling the Western scenery, are within a day's ride from centers containing more than half the population of the United States. The region spans the climate of New England and the Cotton Belt. It contains the crops and the people of the North and the South. The skyline along the top of the main divides and ridges of the Appalachians would overlook a mighty part of the nation's activities. The rugged lands of this skyline would form a camping base, strategic in the country's work and play. Now, Benton's original proposal called not only for a trail, but also for considerable infrastructure, including shelter camps, community camps, even food and farm camps. Oh, I think I've already said that. My apologies. The original proposal was quite ambitious. It called for a continuous footpath from Mount Washington in the New Hampshire's White Mountains to Mount Mitchell in North Carolina's Smokies. In between, the trail would visit the wilds of the Adirondacks, the Green Mountains, the Berkshires, the Catskills, the Alleghenies, and the Blue Ridge. The trail was to be constructed in sections, each assigned to a local community responsible for its preservation and maintenance. A good many sections already existed. For example, the 210-mile long trail through Vermont's Green Mountains. Much of the AT would be completed simply by connecting existing trails. Now, McKay was a dreamer, and it took some movers and shakers to bring the AT to fruition in 1937. Chief among these were Arthur Perkins, a prominent lawyer and judge from Hartford, Connecticut. He was appointed chairman of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy in 1928. And quote, Judge Perkins roamed up and down the trail corridor, enlisting workers, forming Appalachian Trail clubs, and plotting specific routes. The second mover and shaker was Myron Avery, a 27-year-old maritime lawyer who, at the encouragement of Perkins, organized the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club in 1927. When illness incapacitated Perkins, Avery took the reins of the ATC, a position he held for 22 years, and it was on Avery's watch that the Appalachian Trail was completed in 1937. As one might expect, there was friction between the dreamer and the doers. But friction or not, these visionaries made a miracle happen. In recognition of the AT's uniqueness, the Appalachian Trails Act of 1968 designated the AT as a national scenic trail and granted it federal protection into perpetuity. Today, the Appalachian Trail is administered through a model public-private partnership that involves the National Park Service, the nonprofit Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the ATC, 31 volunteer clubs, and several dozen land management agencies. The ATC is headquartered in historic Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, at the psychological midpoint of the trail, near the confluence of the Potomac and the Shenandoah rivers. There, a short section of trail crosses both rivers and visits 3 states, Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland, all within less than 3 miles. A spectacular view of Harpers Ferry can be had from the sheer bluffs of Maryland Heights on the Maryland side of the Potomac River. Now, this next photo is symbolic of that public-private partnership that maintains the Appalachian Trail. Harpers Ferry is home of historic Storer College, established by Northern Baptists to train Black teachers in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. Today, the old college is the Stephen Mather Training Center for the National Park Service. Just a couple hundred yards away lie the offices and visitor center of the Appalachian Trail Center's headquarters. So these 2 primary partners reside a stone's throw from one another. At the visitor center of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, you'll find would-be and veteran hikers. Inside the gift shop, there are necessities for day hikers, through hikers, and section hikers. Among these, shirts, bandanas, socks, hats, water bottles, and maps, and mementos. Everyone that visits the ATC Visitor Center enjoys pondering a relief map of the entire Appalachian Trail. Now, overall administrative responsibility for the Appalachian Trail's 250,000 acres of corridor lands falls to the National Park Service. On average, the corridor spans only 1,000 feet in width. So in one sense, the Appalachian Trail is a very long, skinny national park. However, preservation and management of the trail is the work of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. It's affiliated with dozens of regional clubs whose volunteers undertake the nitty-gritty daily maintenance and repair. These clubs also work closely with land management agencies to preserve surrounding high priority landscapes. Among the largest of the trail clubs, the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, or PATSI for short, benefits from a volunteer workforce of more than 600. It maintains 60 shelters and cabins and keeps in good repair more than 1,000 miles of trail, including 240 miles of the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. The Blackburn Trail Center that you see and that exists in Northern Virginia is a trail maintenance center for the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. Now, of the Appalachian Trail's almost 2,200 miles, nearly 550 miles, a full quarter reside in the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, most of my life, I have lived within 25 minutes of the Appalachian Trail. And for much of that time, I have dreamt sporadically of hiking its entirety. I grew up in Bluefield, West Virginia, in southern West Virginia, just maybe 25 miles from the Appalachian Trail. I now live in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I can be in Shenandoah National Park in about 20 to 25 minutes, and the trail runs through Shenandoah National Park. In my 20s and 30s, I completed a number of section hikes with my brother or a couple of buddies. But completing the entire Appalachian Trail remained a pipe dream. And so at this point, what I would like to do is to transition out of the slideshow temporarily and go back to my video feed. Hope everybody can see me at this point. And I would like to give you a little bit of a personal history. So for some reason, the odyssey that I'll be describing today really began in earnest 31 years ago when I was 40 years of age. I was suddenly beset with an urge to do a solo trek on the Appalachian Trail, and I'd never wanted to hike solo before. My dad had just retired, so he dropped me one morning in Damascus, Virginia, which is Southwest Virginia on the Tennessee border. And I hiked for 5 days up into the high country of White Top, Mount Rogers, and Grayson Highlands State Park. And this is one of my favorite places in the entire world. It's glorious. I started out with an ungodly heavy pack at 54 pounds. But despite that, each day I grew stronger. And by the end of the fourth day, after 15 miles, I was feeling like a veteran. Felt natural carrying the pack all day. And I had a feeling of euphoria at the end of the day, almost like the weightlessness of an astronaut. When you take the pack off, you feel like you can take great leaps and bounds. My dad picked me up on the fifth day. At the time, our family had a cabin near Bluefield, West Virginia. And I spent a night at the cabin with Dad and my grandma, and that was my halfway house back to civilization. So it was a glorious adventure, and then I did nearly nothing for the next 30 years. Career and family intervened, and there were not many opportunities to continue trekking until I semi-retired at age 64. By then, hiking the Appalachian Trail and biking across country were still on my bucket list, but it was pretty clear that I was over the hill. Well, never quite say die. I knew that I could never carry the kind of weight that I used to So if I was going to keep hiking, I had to exchange my archaic heavy gear for modern lightweight gear. And so one expensive item at a time, I upgraded. First my tent to a lightweight one-man tent, then a stove, then a backpack, and finally a down sleeping bag. In September 2013, my wife, Suzanne, dropped me late one morning in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. And with my new gear, I headed south and uphill into Loudon Heights, crossed the Shenandoah River with 40 pounds of gear, expecting to go 7 days, 100 miles, and to convince myself that 24 intervening years had not robbed me of very much stamina. Oh, was I mistaken? Just getting up the hill out of Loudon, from the Shenandoah was bad enough. Well, on the morning of the 5th day, with just 34 miles under my belt, about 8 miles a day, I awakened with a painful blister at the end of a toe, and more terrifying, a numbness all down my right arm. Fearing a heart attack, I popped a baby aspirin, which I always carry in my pocket. Never had heart trouble, but it runs in our family. I called my wife to come rescue me. And then as I began to calm down, I realized that I didn't have any other symptoms than the numbness. And I began to think back to when I had damaged my elbow by lugging a very heavy briefcase every day to work. Well, I had been hiking a section of the trail called the roller coaster, which is up and down and rocky and just treacherous. And I had been hiking with a single pole and putting an enormous amount of pressure on that hiking pole. And I had re-injured my elbow injury and pinched a nerve. So it wasn't a heart attack, but it was time to throw in the towel. And it was a full 3 weeks before I got feeling back in that arm, complete feeling back. Well, the next year, next summer, with expectations greatly trimmed, I tried again, this time anticipating a 3-day inaugural trek. With 2 buddies, Bob Burson, who might be listening, and Wendell Fuqua in Texas. They dropped me at US 522 near Front Royal, and joined me for a few miles as I hiked south into Shenandoah National Park. Well, 8 miles and 2,000 feet in altitude later, now alone, I set up camp on a rocky side trail, moments ahead of a thunderstorm. Then on the second day, after long 12 miles, while pounding downhill toward a park campground, with the hope of a shower, I blew out my left knee. Worse, there was no shower, only a comfort station. I spent the night in excruciating pain. Suzanne came for another rescue. And this time the injury was pretty severe. I had mangled the meniscus in the knee. I limped in pain for 2 months, then spent 2 more months recovering from arthroscopic surgery. It seemed that my backpacking days were abruptly over. An orthopedist said, no more backpacking, take to biking instead. Fortunately, I have a GP, a general practitioner that knows me pretty well. And I think he realized that at this age, it's good to keep doing the things that you love to do. And so he gave tentative permission to go ahead with provisos. And so while I was recovering from surgery, I kind of found a compromise with myself. If I could keep the pack weight down to 30 pounds, keep the number of days out to 3, and the mileage per day to 8 miles per day, I might just be able to continue doing section hikes of 20 to 25 miles. And more to the point, if I slowed down, I might enjoy it more. I might be able to smell the wildflowers along the way. Well, believe it or not, that plan worked. And over the next several summers, I've done 4 to 5 section hikes each summer, each section hike of 20 to 25 miles, usually over 3 days. And then last August, I completed my final section hike of 27 miles to finish the Appalachian Trail in the Virginias, 1/4 of the entire trail. Now, for the last 3 summers, I've had a cell phone. I've carried a modern iPhone, and there are a couple of reasons for that, for safety purposes, but also it doubles as a camera. And so I've been taking a few photographs, mainly just for I thought for my own benefit. Well, realizing I was on the verge of the last section hike, last summer, I started downloading all of these photographs in a frenzy of nostalgia. And then I decided I would write some essays to help me recall all of these experiences. And the whole thing began to evolve, although that was never the original intention. It began to evolve into a photographic essay. And I have interested a very good publisher in this, and we are hoping that we might have a book available in time for the 100th anniversary of the original idea of the Appalachian Trail in 2021. So I would like to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the photographs in that book. And at this point, I will switch back to the slide presentation, back to share screen. Pardon me, folks, I'm having a couple of technical difficulties. And I'm not quite sure how to, here we go. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about trail conventions, including how the trail's blazed, trail shelters, trail names, and trail magic. The entire Appalachian Trail, all 2,200 miles, is blazed with white paint blazes. Typically, they're 1.5 inches by 5 inches. Usually, the blazes are painted on trees, sometimes on rocks, occasionally on posts. I think of these as little lighthouses guiding the way of the hiker, and you never want to be too far from one of these. Another convention is the double blaze, and the double blaze just means, hey, pay attention, something's going to change. Usually the change is a switchback. The direction of the trail is going to change. Sometimes it's alerting you to a false trail. Here, don't go through the hole in the rocks there. The Appalachian Trail does not go there. Particularly in Shenandoah National Park, you'll find these concrete posts at trail junctures where side trails come in. You may be able to read it, but this, here the Appalachian Trail runs right alongside Loft Mountain Campground, and the metal band is telling hikers that the camp store of the campground is just 70 yards away. And guess what? There are showers there, drinks, and food. So it's a great place to stop. Here and there, you'll find modern signs. These are very rare. This one is near Dragon's Tooth, which is a spectacular rock formation not too far from Blacksburg. Now, amazingly, much of Benton McKay's legacy lives on, including his shelter camps. There are trail shelters all along the Appalachian Trail. Typically, they're spaced on average 8.5 miles apart, sometimes as few as 5 miles apart, sometimes as far as 15 miles apart. Appalachian Trail shelters are typically very primitive. They're three-sided log lean-tos. Those are the classic ones. By the way, I want to note that you'll see a blue blaze on the trail leading to the trail shelter here. And blue blazes are for side trails, trails that connect, or spur trails, trails that connect with the Appalachian Trail. Now, the convention is that through hikers, those that are hiking the entire Appalachian Trail in one fell swoop, have priority at trail shelters because they're traveling light. But usually there are campsites for tents for everybody else, like hikers like myself or section hikers. And in the upper left corner of this slide, you can see a tent has been pitched, and I pitched mine just to the right outside of the frame. Now, most trail shelters have amenities. I use that in quotes, usually a privy, a picnic table, and if you're lucky, a water source that's not too far away. But sometimes the water source, as it was here at the rice field shelter, was a half a mile downhill. Some of the more modern shelters are frame. They're still three-sided, but they have amenities like a large deck with bench seating and even sometimes Adirondack chairs. This is Doc's Knob Shelter on Paris Mountain. There are a few scattered stone shelters like Trimpey Shelter near Troutdale. And one of the amenities of this, because it's stone, there's a fireplace at back. So this would be a great place to hang out in very cold weather. The most modern shelter that I've encountered is the Partnership Shelter, and it's only 200 yards from Mount Rogers Visitor Center. It's actually bi-level. There's the three-sided open downstairs, and then there's a very steep ladder to a loft that's open at both ends. And so there's a sleeping area upstairs. That's my wife at the shelter, and just to her right is a shower. And this is the only shelter that I know with a shower. It's ice cold, of course, but if you're dirty enough, that's okay. As I mentioned, most shelters have a water source and a privy. The more modern privies are called moldering privies, which is another term for composting. They're much more eco-friendly than the old pit toilets, which were quite ecologically destructive. Oddly enough, for reasons I don't understand, most of these new privies are three-sided as well. So if you see feet, the etiquette is to wait your turn. Now, hikers fall into three basic categories: day hikers, section hikers like myself, and through hikers who are doing the whole trail in one fell swoop. Most through hikers take on trail names, and these are nicknames or monikers that kind of afford some middle ground between familiarity and anonymity. Everyone introduces him or herself by their trail name, and they sign the guest book in the trail shelters with their trail name. Here are just a few that I've encountered. The guy you see here is the postman. Not quite sure how he got his name, but most trail names either have to do with some character quirk of the person or some experience that they have on the trail. And so it's a name almost taken in Native American fashion that describes a life experience that's important to the person. So I've met Ramble on Rose, the Colonel, Walkabout John, Madeira, Rusty. Now Santa was interesting. He was about 60-year-old guy bounding up the trail in a red and white Santa hat. And then there was CH. Now CH is the bald-headed guy at Bailey's Gap Shelter here. And you'll meet him again, or not, you won't meet him again, you'll meet the shelter again in a story I'd like to tell. Now CH, his name is kind of a double entendre. His initials are CH, but he's Swiss. And Switzerland officially is the Confederation of Helvetia, and on the Swiss license plate are the letters CH. Now, trail magic. Trail magic is the secret elixir that keeps hikers going despite fatigue, weather, and mishaps. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy defines trail magic of 3 types: finding exactly what you need when you least expect it, encountering unexpected acts of generosity that restore one's faith in humanity, or experiencing something rare, extraordinary, or inspiring in nature. Now, one of these cans of Pepsi saved my bacon on a remote and waterless section near Burke's Garden, Virginia. Trail magic is often the work of trail angels. Now, they come in professional and non-professional varieties. Here are Dave and Donna Seeley, caretakers of the Blackburn Trail Center. They're professionals. Most trail angels you'll never meet because they are people who give random acts of kindness, and which are just that, random, like those Pepsis stowed on a rock where the Appalachian Trail crossed a fire road. One of my favorite trail magic experiences happened near Interstate 81 in a little town called Gross Close, or near there. And it involved the Lindamood Schoolhouse. Now, I had been forewarned about this by a hiker going the other direction. I think it was the colonel, but he was very coy about it because he didn't want to spoil my experience. He only wanted to make sure that I stopped here. The Lindamood Schoolhouse is a one-room schoolhouse built in 1894. It ceased service in 1937, and the interior is almost identical to how it would have appeared in 1937. There are photographs or pictures of Lincoln and Washington on the wall. There's a flag with not the right number of stars. They're the desks typical of the era, and a wood-burning stove. Now, the only modern conveniences, which you can't see, are 3 coolers along the back wall. And they are stashed with bottles of water, soda, and snacks. And they're all provided free of charge by the Trail Angels of a Methodist church nearby. What a wonderful place to stop and rest. Now, the trail is very, very rustic. Most of the amenities are, but occasionally you can treat yourself to something more glamorous. There are quite a few hostels along the trail. A few of them are right on the trail or nearby. Quite a few are quite a ways off the trail. My last section hike began and ended at Bear Garden Hiker Hostel near Ceres, Virginia. Now, this is a retirement dream of Bob and Bertie Lingham, who moved here from Michigan and had been wanting to open a hostel for a long time. It's a very rustic place. There are just 4 buildings: the bunkhouse that you see in the lower picture, the privy, which is in the small building in the lower picture. There's also a bathhouse and a chapel, and they consider this a form of ministry, so that there's a chapel as a part of their hostel. Now, I usually avoid hostels because I figure they're for the younger crowd who are more gregarious and a bit rowdier, and I really don't want to party till late at night. But I had heard so much about one hostel on Paris Mountain that I just had to stay there. And that is Woods Hole Hostel and Bed and Breakfast. It's a half a mile down a gravel road, but it more than lived up to expectation. I found it a bit of a Shangri-La. There's an old farmhouse that's been lovingly restored, and upstairs are 2 bed and breakfast rooms. There's an organic farm. It's run by a couple, about 40 years in age. They met on the Appalachian Trail, Neville and Michael. They both have artistic sentiments. So even though everything is rustic, they're just all of these little artistic touches. The bunkhouse that you see in the lower picture is full of tile and just wonderful little works of art, as is the bathhouse, which is heated by a wood-burning stove. A few extra bucks will get you an organic dinner or an organic breakfast, or both. I had both. And this is the table where we had our dinner the evening I stayed there. You can also engage in glamping at Woods Hole. That's short for glamour camping. They had just erected 2 safari tents on wooden platforms. Each safari tent had a queen-size bed, a nightlight, and a screened porch with an incredible view of the valley below. I confess I rented one of the safari tents, and that was the best night I had at any point of my hiking experiences on the trail. Another kind of glamping experience would be you can actually rent a yurt at Grayson Highlands State Park in Southwest Virginia. I did not do that, but the campground there is only a mile off of the Appalachian Trail. The most indulgent glamping that I did was a night at Peaks of Otter Lodge. My wife met me at an overlook when I had hiked the apple orchard section of trail, and then we stayed at the lodge that night and indulged in the famous buffet that they have there. Now, strangely, the Appalachian Trail does not run directly through many towns. 2 of the most famous trail towns are Damascus on the Tennessee border at the southern end of Virginia, and then Harper's Ferry at the northern end. The Appalachian Trail also runs through Daleville near Roanoke, and it runs through Parisburg. And then there are a number of other towns that are kind of favorite resupply towns, but they're not exactly on the trail. One has to hitchhike to get there. And these include Marion, Virginia, and you can actually get a bus ride from the Visitor Center at Mount Rogers National Recreation Area. There's also Luray. Waynesboro is a favorite resupply place, and also a place called Atkins near Groves Close, where the Linda Mood Schoolhouse is. But of course, if you really want to treat yourself, you can find 4-star restaurants in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, like this one, just a couple of blocks from the Appalachian Trail. Now, I would like to go back at this point and exit from the slideshow and to tell you a couple of stories. And it's clear to me that I won't have time to talk about trail gear, but that's okay. One story is pretty short, and then the other one's a bit longer. And we'll end with that. The first story goes back almost 50 years. One of my first hiking companions was my brother, who's 9 years younger. And when he was a teenager, I could actually talk him into hiking a section of the trail with me. So I was teaching in Richmond, Virginia, and during spring break, I went home and my dad put my brother Willie and me on the trail on an Easter Sunday. I believe it was in April, but it was a very cold day. It was 32 degrees exactly. And we were hiking in the fog all morning on a ridge near Mountain Lake Wilderness area. I think the trail has since been rerouted because I recently did that section again and it was not on the ridge. So I think the trail was rerouted so it went closer to a water source. But on this particular day, as I said, it was 32 degrees, there was fog, and rime ice had formed everywhere on the trees. Rime ice is a very feathery kind of ice. And so we were walking through a winter wonderland all day. We got to the trail shelter about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Bailey's Gap Shelter, which I've already shown you. And when we got there, we set up camp at the shelter, put our sleeping bags in. And we'd been there for about a half an hour when 3 young women showed up. And it turns out that I said, well, how far are you guys going? And they said, well, this is it. So I thought I would be friendly and said, well, hi, I'm Dave, and this is my brother, Will. We're staying here too. And they said, oh, we're the Pruett sisters. And I was flabbergasted, pulled out my driver's license and said, well, we're the Pruett brothers. Well, they spelled their name with an I, P-R-U-I-T-T. So at any rate, the 5 Pruetts had been there for a few minutes when a dog showed up, and then two young children. About 10 minutes beyond that, the parents came up the trail huffing and puffing, and they were the 4 Smiths, or 5 Smiths if you count the dog. And so it turns out that all 10 of us were staying in this small trail shelter, which turned out to be a very, very good thing, because one of either the Smiths or the Pruetts had brought a gallon jug of water. When the sun went down, the temperature dropped. It plummeted to 15 degrees at night. The gallon jug of water froze solid. So it's a good thing that we were all stuffed in there like sardines. The next day, my brother and I bushwhacked down the mountain, following Little Stony Creek all the way from its source, down past the Cascades, which is a popular waterfall near Pembroke, Virginia, and then into Pembroke, where we called my parents to come pick us up. Oh, there's another story I would love to tell you, but we are running short of time, and I do want to show you a slide presentation to give you a flavor of some of the incredible variety that you will find along the Appalachian Trail. So without further ado, let's go to that. And here we go.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Your screen's not sharing.
Uh-oh. Okay. I must have gotten out of screen share. My apologies. Let's try this again. I will get out of the slide presentation. Cancel. Screen share. Screen share. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's see. So, how are we doing now, Rodney?
You've got it.
Okay, my apologies, everyone. Well, everything okay, Rodney?
Everything's perfect.
Folks, am I back, Rodney?
You are, Dave.
Uh, the slideshow really was going to run for 4 more minutes, but we're running short on time. And I would like to briefly mention my very favorite experience, which was from, oddly enough, was just the next to the last night of my very last section hike from Chestnut Knob overlooking Burke's Garden. Burke's Garden is an unusual valley in Tazewell County, Virginia. It's an oval-shaped valley of 8 miles by 4 miles. From the air, it looks like a volcanic caldera or even a meteor strike, but we are told that it's a gigantic sinkhole. Well, it turns out that both of my dad's grandmothers are from Burke's Garden. And I camped one night at a Davis farm campsite, which was, well, my paternal grandmother was Sheila Alice Davis, and she had married William Drury Davis. Well, my grandmother was Sheila Alice Davis, and her mother had married William Drury Davis, who was also from Burke's Garden. So I might have been looking down from this perch on where a lot of my ancestors came from. And it was there I was inspired to write the postscript for this book, if it ever sees the light of day. And it was from Chestnut Knob, 4,400 feet in elevation, with this glorious view of the knob, of Burke's Garden. It's a fitting end to my odyssey, what began unwittingly 31 years ago when Dad dropped me in Damascus, and I hiked north into the high country of White Top and Mount Rogers. Continued in earnest 6 years ago when my wife left me in Harper's Ferry and I set out to the south. 24 section hikes in between these bookends, and I have all but accomplished a goal that seemed oftentimes pipe dream or folly. If all goes well tomorrow and the morning thereafter, I will return to Bear Garden Hiker Hostel. There I'll shower, visit briefly with hostelers Bob and Bertie, pick up my car and drive home. If all goes as planned these next 2 days, I will have completed all of the AT in the 2 Virginias. I'm an anxious person, I confess, and solo hiking sometimes stokes that anxiety. There are so many ways to get into trouble. I don't usually relax until I'm back home, but at this moment in time, looking through my quote porch screen down onto Burke's garden, where Neils and Hagers and Davises once lived, and some still do, hearing the bees buzz and feeling a slight breeze, I am perfectly content. There is no place in this wide world than where I would rather be. Than where no place in this wide world I would rather be than where I am, high on the Appalachian Trail. Thank you, and I guess it's time for Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Dave. And if anyone has a question and knows how to raise their hand, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, you can type your question in the chat box, and I will selectively unmute you so you can talk to Dave. Okay. We have one from Randy Marshall. Go ahead.
Well, Dave, first of all, I want to say thank you ever so much. This was really a wonderful experience. And one of the original thoughts I had when I read the description of your course was the whole idea about senior walkers walking the Appalachian Trail. And I was wondering if you either had verbal advice or if you might in the future have some sort of a pamphlet of suggestions and maybe even the suggestions of trails that seniors themselves might be able to take.
Well, first of all, an observation, Randy. Thanks for your question. It turns out that the distribution of hikers on the trail is sort of statistically bimodal. There's all these young whippersnappers, and then there's a lot of us retired folks, and there's not too many in the middle. And over the years, I've seen more and more older folks on the trail. And if you haven't read Grandma Gatewood's Walk, she was the first female hiker to complete the Appalachian Trail, and she did it at the age of 66, I think, and then completed it again the next 2 years thereafter. I probably would recommend not doing what I do, which is solo hiking a lot of the time. But I try to hit windows of opportunity, and you can't always talk someone else into doing it at the same time. But I go north to south, so I meet a lot of hikers going the other direction. I do that intentionally, so I'll meet more people. Be easy on yourself. Don't expect a lot. No, I don't have a pamphlet, but I'd be happy to share whatever wisdom I've accumulated. But there are a lot of things that can get you into trouble. And the thing I worry about most is falls. And I did tumble off the trail once, but it was, I found out why it happened. And so I know not to do what I did poorly to cause that to happen now. So.
Dave, our next question is from Ann. I'm going to unmute Ann.
Hey, Ann.
Hi, David. Thank you so much, David, for this. You have inspired me because you are an inspiring fellow teacher. So thank you. And thank you to Rodney for making this possible. So I have a question about timing because I have no sense of how long this trail is. So let's say, for the sake of example, you decided to go 8 miles a day, give or take. How many days would it take you to complete the trail?
To do the whole AT?
Yeah. I have no clue. How many?
Well, it would take about a half a year. Yeah, most through hikers average about 14 miles a day. The fastest ones do a lot more, 20 or so. I'm only good for about 8 miles a day. So a 14 mile a day through hiker would spend 4 months. So at 8 miles a day, it's been 6 or 7 months.
Oh my God, I had no clue.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Dave? I'll call on you. Bev, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you. Just as a source of information, I bought this a couple of years ago, I think actually Costco, and it's called Appalachian Trail Guide to the Shenandoah National Park. And it gives it 3 different maps and a complete book, and it's incredibly helpful. So it's just called Appalachian Trail Guide to Shenandoah National Park, and it is published by the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. So
thanks for sharing that. And to the first, to Randy's question, the thing to do would be to start out doing some day hikes, get comfortable with that, carrying just a day pack, and your book would be helpful for that. And then consider if you're up to, overnight. And I would start out with just a single overnight. And in a place like Shenandoah National Park where, you can get to a road quickly if need be. Thank
Dave,
you.
the next question comes from Frank. Frank, you're unmuted.
Hey, Rodney.
Hey
Thank
there.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Together with Jerry Hopkins, I maintain the Smith Roach Trail up in the national park.
Thank you.
We clear brush, we pick up branches and saw trees that fall across the trail. Tell me what your Appalachian Conservancy group does.
Well, I'm ashamed to confess that I'm a member of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, a contributing member, but I haven't done trail maintenance myself. So I'm a supporter of it, but I haven't done that.
Are there any more questions for Dave? And I did have one request, and it was to allow people at the end to unmute themselves, and I'm going to stop the recording.